Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Alopecia Angel podcast. I am so happy to be recording this episode for you. We'll be met and we will be discussing with Dr. Sam Shea about genetics, autoimmunity, and of course, testing, genetics testing to be exact. Something that I'm very excited to share with you that Alopecia Angel will be offering as of today to all my clients. So we will also offer genetic testing, and this will give you a full blueprint of what's good for you, what's wrong for you, and what we need to do to avoid things. So making personalization even more personal for you. Very exciting. Dr. Sam Shea is a functional medicine expert, speaker, and stand-up comic who helps people get out of their survival mode and reclaim their energy, focus, and vitality through personalized functional lab testing and his signature neuroharmony model. After overcoming years of chronic fatigue, insomnia, and digestive issues, since childhood, Dr. Sam turned his recovery into a mission. He spent the last 25 years mastering the science of nutrition, mind-body medicine, and clinical lab testing to decode the root causes of burnout, overwhelm, and chronic health issues. Known as the friendly lab nerd, Dr. Sam makes advanced lab testing approachable, combining deep data analysis with relatable insights to help clients balance hormones, support the gut, optimize sleep, and reduce inflammation. His unique neural harmony model weaves together functional testing with nervous system regulation to create sustainable health, not just short-term fixes. He's been featured in over 200 podcasts and summits and brings an engaging, humorous tone to even the most complex health topics. Dr. Sam empowers his audience with practical tools to feel better and function at their best. And I'm so excited to be partnering with him so that I will be offering his exact genetic testing for our clients moving forward. Very excited to have him on the podcast today. Welcome to the show, Dr. Sam Shea. I'm so excited to have you here. Normally, anytime anyone is diagnosed with anything, especially autoimmune diseases, especially alopecia, we go straight to the genetic component. Who has it in our family? And in my case, no one has it in my family. I am the only one. And in many other cases, this is what we see. No one has it, and they're just the one lonely person who does have it, where that genetic expression does show up. And so I'd love to have your perspective in regards to genetics, epigenetics, because I can tell my audience so many times about genetics and epigenetics, but maybe hearing it from somebody else, it resonates a little more.
Sure. I'll make the distinction between genetics and epigenetics, and I think that may be really useful. So genetics is what is our hardwired potential to express. Epigenetics is what happens in our environment, or either in our environment or in ourselves, that then directs how the genes are expressed. One way to view it is a dial, that we have a genetic potential and it's a dial. People have their needle has a set point, meaning that it defaults to a particular position on the dial. And that's their genetics, is the default setting. And then based on lifestyle factors, the environment, things that we do know, choices we make knowingly, choices we make unknowingly, the environment that we happen to be around, the environment that we choose to be in, the environment that we have no choice around, the state of our mind, the state of our food, the state of our sleep, the state of our exercise, the state of exposure to certain things and others, toxic chemicals, the quality of food we have, the regularity, all these different factors will shift the needle on the dial accordingly. The environmental influence is massive, and this is why I like to say genes are fixed but flexible. So you have a range, and for some people, they're more in a zone of their genetics where they're less affected by any negative inputs from the environment. So you've got people who they're not as prone to inflammation, just genetically. They're just less prone to it. They're less prone to they need like less vitamin D, for example, because their ability to absorb it and use it is much greater. You've got people, and I'm talking about not necessarily just synthesizing vitamin D, but actually vitamin D receptors. Like getting vitamin D from the sunlight into the bloodstream is about 6 genes. But you can also get vitamin D from food and supplements, getting it into the bloodstream. But then there's a whole other set of genes called the VDR genes, for example, vitamin D receptors, that help you get vitamin D from the blood into the cells. So some people can get vitamin D into their blood, whether it's from supplements, sunlight, or food, but then getting it into the cells to actually do its work is another set of genes entirely. This is how people can have the same lifestyle, but different genes and have different health outcomes. You can have people with the same genes and different lifestyle have different health outcomes. It answers both. So people who are twins, identical set of genes, and one is stressed out, junk food, irregular sleep, irregular meals, doesn't exercise, and has just not an ideal lifestyle. The other one is very disciplined, very focused, gets coached, has a roadmap, very clear and structured in how they deal with the inputs into their life, whether it's food or the dietary inputs, social inputs, environmental inputs, movement inputs, thinking inputs, whatever it might be. It's much better and healthier, more congruent for them in their genetic blueprint. You get same genes, but totally different health expression. So the good news about genetics is that even though genetics it's fixed and it's flexible, the good news is that you can focus on the priority genes that you can do something about. Not all genes you can do something about really easily, but there are a certain lot of genes, about 150 or so, that you can really do something about: lifestyle, diet, nutrition, to shift the genes into an expression that you want. In the genetics world, you've got this concept of green, yellow, and red dots. Green is you've got 2 good copies of a gene. Yellow is 1 good, 1 bad copy of a gene. And red is 2 bad copies of the gene. Some people, their default in the green. Others, their default are in the yellow. Others, their default in the red. And for people who are, say, in the green dot, they're already starting out in a really good place. And if their lifestyle, whether knowingly or unknowingly, is not good, the needle will be pushed into the yellow and red, causing more inflammation, more autoimmune issues, more pain, more inflammation, more toxic buildup, more discomfort, issues with, you pick whatever bad process people are worried about, whether it's loss of their hair, changes in their skin, changes in their digestion, changes in their weight, whatever it might be. Their default is in the green, but if the bad lifestyle, it'll start to behave like a yellow red. The green dot genes will never become a red dot or become a yellow dot, but it'll behave like one. And if someone's a yellow dot, they will have to work harder to make their genes behave like a green dot. And if they're not attentive, it'll careen backwards into a red dot. And people who are born with a red dot as a default, they have to work really hard consistently to get their genes to express more like a green dot. And again, the red dot will never be a green dot, but it can make it behave like one. So for people like me, I have a sea of red and yellow dots in my, the 15 most important inflammatory genes. And I've struggled with chronic health issues since I was a child. And it's one of the reasons I got really interested and focused on natural medicine, functional medicine, ultimately genetics, which I've been seriously involved with for over 10 years now. And when I work with someone, or when I teach other coaches and I teach other practitioners on how to run genetics in their practice, we only focus on the genes that people can do something about, because there's a lot of genetics tests out there that too bad, you've got this red and yellow dot in these particular genes. Oh, you're screwed. The message that I want to give is that you can leverage genetics, the highest priority, most important genes for health, in very simple, direct ways to help people express their genes and their epigenetics as optimally as possible. The question is, what are people's goals? If people want to understand what their blueprint is, what's my genetic optimal diet? What are the foods I need to avoid genetically? Am I more genetically suited for keto, paleo, Mediterranean, or high carb? Those genetics tests exist. If people want to learn what their optimal genetic-based diet is, the foods to avoid, the foods that they are better suited for, if they want to understand what their optimal form of exercise type is, for performance, are they more endurance? Are they more sprint? Are they somewhere in between? Do they need to put even more focus on recovery? Because some people genetically need to put way more focus on recovery for their exercise. They only exercise, but they don't focus on the recovery, and they actually can create problems if they miss that other half. And then what are the most important genes to focus on for them in order to help with their health, their well-being, and the longevity? So I would say that genetics is the most important foundational test for people to do, because you can do it once and it's done, as opposed to other functional tests, which are great, like whether it's a thyroid test or a stool test, hormone test, or CBC or CMP. Those are very helpful when they're taken and done under the right practitioner, the right circumstance, the right interpretation. They're incredibly valuable. But the problem is that the value of those tests decays over time. You don't base a decision based on something from over a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. But with your genes, you've got this template that's there for life.
What I wanted to get into is this scope of autoimmunity, because as I mentioned earlier, for some people, we see it in just one person, the whole family. And then in others, you see a lineage where mom, dad aunts, uncles all had this. And then lo and behold, now my client also has alopecia. So we talked a little bit about epigenetics, talked about genetics. So what is the difference between Western and functional genetics?
So Western genetics follows very much along the one cause, one problem model. It's very much modeled after germ theory, where you have one bacteria or one pathogen causes one specific disease. So the corollary in genetics is they've got one gene that causes this one thing. And we're going to try to find the one gene that causes this one disease. And as opposed to, we're going to look at the health of the organism, we're going to look at the health of the environment. So I'm not looking for necessarily the alopecia gene. I'm not looking for that specific gene. What I'm looking for is what are the genetic clusters that make any type of autoimmunity as such a higher risk. So I'm looking at the cluster, not a singular most important inflammatory gene. I'm looking for what are the top 15 most important inflammatory genes that if someone has multiple red and yellow dots across those 15, that they are much more highly prone to all chronic inflammatory issues and the downstream consequences from that, which can look like, amongst other things, autoimmunity. And whether it's to the hair or to the skin or to the thyroid or to pancreas or whatever it is, what they all can have in common is unchecked chronic inflammation that is then provoking an immune response that then the antibodies are now much higher and much more abundant. One way I like to describe antibodies is that antibodies are shape-seeking missiles, not heat-seeking missiles, shape-seeking missiles, where the antibodies are attacking something that they think is an invader. And they're only looking for like strands of 8 to 12 amino acids. They're just looking for strands of protein that look like it. It's akin to you walk into the middle of a turf war. So autoimmunity is collateral damage, that you've got your immune system attacking one thing, but other normal human tissue is caught in the crossfire. So these antibodies are shape-seeking missiles. They're attacking the thing, and then they happen to attack also human tissue, particularly human tissue that looks like the thing that they're trying to go after. How does autoimmunity even start? When I was going through my functional medicine training, we learned from the researcher who put together the three-part process. You need to have the thing that upsets the immune system. You have to have a leaky gut in order for that thing to get into the bloodstream where it shouldn't be. And then you have to have a genetic predisposition to create the immune response to that thing that got through the leaky gut, that then now you've got all these shape-seeking missiles looking like that thing that got through the gut that happened to look like the shape of some normal human tissue, in this case, human hair. Now, when we look at the leaky gut layer, what is the thing that you can do something about? If you can control what enters into your digestive system, and you can also control how healthy your gut is. If the gut lining is not permeable, then you don't have the things leaking through that trigger the immune response in the first place. So the connection here genetically is that if you are more prone to, for example, higher inflammation genetically, then your gut's more prone to have holes in it, more prone to be leaky, whatever term you want to use. And that's something that we can do something about if you understand your genetics. So you can look at the big picture of how can I maintain the integrity of my entire gut lining, whether or not you're concerned about autoimmunity to your hair or your skin or your thyroid or anything else. We're looking at the bigger picture. That's functional genetics, as opposed to fixating on a singular gene, because the disease genes are downstream of the genetic drivers of disease. The drivers are, number one, inflammation. And then I don't want to look at just all the inflammation genes because there's hundreds of them that act directly and indirectly on inflammation. I want to look at the top 15 that control all the ones underneath them. Then the next priority are the three main genes that control quenching free radicals in the mitochondria. Mitochondria is where 95% of all your free radicals are made, because that's the furnace where you burn fuel, proteins, fats, and carbs to make ATP, or the body's energy source. Like when you burn a log on fire, you got sparks that fly everywhere. Those sparks are the free radicals. And so you need like little janitors running around putting out those sparks, and three major genes that put out those sparks. And if you don't put out those sparks, then those sparks in your mitochondria will set the factory on fire. If you have too much free radicals, then your mitochondria will be effectively on fire, and you can't make the energy to heal, repair, and function. Then you've got the genes that control liver detox. Then you got the genes that control your vitamin D receptors. You got genes that control methylation, cardiovascular circulation, and the fat and energy metabolism. Those are the 7 drivers of all disease: inflammation, free radicals, liver detox, vitamin D receptors, methylation, cardiovascular circulation, fat and energy metabolism, in that order. You'll notice I didn't name any diseases in there. So I'm looking at a functional genetics. I'm looking at those 7 drivers and focusing on the genes that can be shifted in their expression through lifestyle, diet, nutrition alone, so they behave less like red and yellow dots and more like green dots. And then the second set of genes I'm looking at is all the dietary genes. I'm looking at the genes that are food triggers, the genes that control eating behavior. For example, some people crave sugar more than others genetically. Some people are less full from normal amounts of food. Some people are averse to bitter flavored foods, so they avoid like healthy green vegetables because they're just averse to it. If people have these behavioral genes, then if you don't know that, there can be this really unhealthy relationship with food where it's, oh, I'm an overeater, I just overeat. And then if you turns out like me, you're genetically prone to overeating, then that can remove this kind of existential guilt and shame around my eating behaviors. And how is that practical? If I have a genetic risk of overeating, then I need to change my environment, not fight my willpower. So if you know that, like, I don't keep bread in the house. I'm smarter than bread, but I'm not stronger than it. So I just don't buy it, because if I buy it from the store, it's barely going to make it to the car before it's half eaten. But if it's not within reach, then I'm just controlling my environment. My willpower is irrelevant because there's not even something to fight my willpower about. When people don't know their genetics and their genetic vulnerabilities, then they're acting from a place of shame and guilt and confusion and overwhelm. And instead it's, oh, I'm just genetically programmed in this direction. And then there's your genes around exercise. If you don't know about your genes around exercise, you can be doing the wrong type of exercise and under recovering, therefore triggering all the inflammatory genes, for example. When people are looking at functional genetics, it's a message of empowerment, not a message of kind of fatalism. I'll give you the most public example was that the BRCA2 gene, for example, Angelina Jolie got both of her healthy breasts removed because she had this genetic risk. Now, people should know that it's about half the women who have this gene never get breast cancer. I'm not minimizing the concern you have about those other half, but that should tell you right away that your genes are not your destiny.
Amen.
There are so many other factors at play. And that's what I'm talking about, those 7 drivers of disease and all the dietary genes. And if you know what your genetic vulnerabilities are, you can change your lifestyle, diet, nutrition to have them express as optimally as possible, which can minimize the expression of these downstream disease genes.
That's why in speaking with you, I got really excited to be offering this to my clients, because I think this is such a game changer in terms of taking full control of our health. And granted, many times we know what to do, we just don't do it. And we're going to actually have a proof roadmap of exactly why it is that even when we try to do something, it doesn't work our way, or it doesn't go as quickly as it should, or for whatever reason, doesn't make it to the finish line as we would like. What other markers can you share with us in regards to your testing? Because when we went over it together, it was astonishingly very different than other types of tests that I've seen. It just gives you so much information, and it's just, bam, it's just 1, 2, 3. And it tells you exactly what it is that you need to do, you need to change, you need to implement now so that we can start seeing better results as soon as possible. I think this is what any type A person, but any person in general would love to have in their hands.
Totally. I'm sharing my screen an example of one of the reports that I put together. So this is a report that I designed over the past 10 plus years of being involved in genetics. The difference between this genetic test and others out there is that this is focused on what's practical and what people can do in order of priority. So right out the gate, when people are going through it, there's a table of contents that people can fast travel through. But the most important stuff is put right up at the top. This is an example of a real person that is a 1-page summary. On the top left is their optimal diet based on their genetics. Here are the top 5 genetic-based supplements. Here is their exercise recommendations, and a real important reminder that you need to stay hydrated. Now, people can ask, how do you genetics and hydration? It's more of a practical thing that if people are really wanting to drop, say, inflammation, drinking water is one of the best ways to help move inflammation out of the body. But also, if you're going to be taking really high quality genetics-based supplements and you're not increasing the amount of water, those supplements, they're powders, you need water to process them. You can dry yourself out a bit unless you increase your water intake. So I've included hydration there. But the big 3 around genetics is your diet, supplements, and exercise. And so for this person, this is the summary. This is the practical summary. And then the rest of the report has, if you want to dive deeper into what's a low histamine diet, why the low, no caffeine recommendations, why the low, no alcohol, why elimination diet. That's all there, but the practical thing is upfront. Histamine is the body's flood switch, and it flooded the area with water to dilute the venom from the bee sting, because that venom in a concentrated form can really damage muscle, nerve, arteries, tissues. And so the body will flood the air with water to dilute the venom. That's what the point of histamine is, to cause rapid swelling. The problem is that if people are very sensitive to histamine genetically and they eat a high histamine food, that's the equivalent of eating a slow-moving full-body bee sting. Going on a low histamine diet can be challenging for people because there's a lot of, quote, health foods that for people who are genetically vulnerable are high in histamine, like avocados, for example. Here's a low, no caffeine. So some people are genetically vulnerable to caffeine-induced anxiety and depression. What if people's anxiety and depression was not necessarily because they have bad thoughts, because they're doing things dietarily that compromise their physiology, that provoke a low level or sometimes high level of anxiety and depression? So I didn't know this about myself. I'm sorry to say I drank coffee since I was 6 years old. And that's because growing up, I had severe insomnia from the stress at school and the stress at home. It's one of the reasons I became a functional medicine doctor and went to graduate school and just dove into genetics and dove into functional medicine. I was chronically unwell as a child and all the way up through my teens. And I made a decision, like, I need to take control of my own health because the Western model, for my case, was not working. In fact, it was making things worse. I didn't know that coffee was one of the main inputs for my anxiety and depression. And even in the natural health space, I found about bulletproof coffee. And if I just stuff enough coconut oil in coffee, I'll do great. It doesn't matter how much coconut oil I stuffed into my coffee. I was still an anxious, jittery mess. But I thought, oh, look, I have all this energy. I was conflating anxiety for energy and calling it healthy. So some people, they're just like me, they're just genetically vulnerable. I didn't know that till I read my genetics. Other people, the blood pressure genes for salt, there's dozens of causes of blood pressure, of which salt is a factor, not the factor. But what I do see most often with people who have problems with their, quote, blood pressure genes is not necessarily high blood pressure, but water retention. And so if people are struggling with weight and it's like that watery weight and exercise isn't doing anything about it, it may be water retention, whether it's from histamine or salt or inflammation, because inflammation will trigger this water retention response. Here's an example of what are low histamine foods, high histamine foods that increase your own internal production of it, foods that block the breakdown of it. What are the major signs of histamine sensitivity? That slide on food allergens, like here's the top 7 food allergens that are listed. Again, be honest with yourself. Do you find yourself react to any of these? And if people have a yellow dot in food allergens, then they do better on an elimination diet. I'm just jumping to the highlights here. So for people that have problems using vitamin D, then you've got some things you've got to do. Avoid pollution, avoid smoking, take something like sulforaphane. And for people who are wondering where the actual genes that are listed here, they're at the end of each section. It is so much easier for both the practitioner, the coach, and especially, and most importantly, the client who's actually trying to use this data. The issue with most other genetics tests is that they just give you a chart like this. It's just, okay, here's the genes and here's the dots and here's all this really super scientific language. It's overwhelming, it's confusing, and ultimately it's paralyzing. Here's 300 genes with their attending 300 recommendations, and people get overwhelmed. It's not prioritized. It's somewhat organized, but it's not prioritized. And people just get overwhelmed. Oh my God, I can't do all of this. So with a genetics test that actually prioritizes what's the most important thing to do is a total game changer.
I've taken one other genetics test, which was really about your microbiome, which I will say it was lackluster. The only change or anything that they saw that was wrong per se was to stop eating apples. And that was their only recommendation. I was like, we're missing the mark here. There's more to it than just one thing or even two things. And so you're right. This is a game changer to have intricate explanation of every factor of every gene and how this actually contributes to our well-being, to our everyday, and to even about how we can change things. And just as a caveat for my listeners who are maybe thinking, well, I already have allergies, I already have this, or my son or my daughter already has this and that, take it with a grain of salt because we can always mitigate things. So for example, my own little one, he did allergy testing. We've done multiple different types of tests, and he came back with a sensitivity to dairy. And at the time he was telling me, Mommy, my tummy bothers me. My tummy hurts every time he drank milk. I took out the milk. We did some protocols. We healed everything. Lo and behold, now he's back to dairy and he's fine. And so the thing is, things can change. Things can even get better. And just like I have the gene for alopecia, that doesn't mean it has to be out in the open. I've healed myself and it's into remission. And because of my choices, because of my environment, because of my day-to-day diet and lifestyle, it's been gone for over 9 years. And that's even with COVID, even with postpartum at 40 or having my first child at 40, or even after stressful times moving from country to country. It doesn't matter. We have full control of how these genes are expressed. So even if something were to come up in the test just understand you have more control over it. And this will give you an outline, a roadmap, next steps on what exactly needs to happen for us to make the changes, for us to have a better expression in our genes.
Completely. The other thing that's unique to this test is your carb tolerance score. And this is very difficult to get in the West, but now it's easy because now I literally provide it and help coaches and practitioners run this. This is the test that can tell you if you're better suited for keto or paleo style, Mediterranean style, or higher carb style diet. So this is not looking at green, yellow, and red dots. This is looking at the number of duplicates of the AME1 gene. AME1 stands for amylase. Amylase is the enzyme in the saliva that is the first critical step to break down carbohydrates. If you want to talk about one of the most important epigenetic influences on someone's health, well-being, longevity, their gut, their inflammation, whatever it might be, it's what is your carb tolerance? How many carbs are you having per meal? If you're having too many for your capacity, you're going to have a lot of digestive upset. And you're going to create these mood and energy and digestive fluctuations that are going to affect all sorts of stuff from blood sugar to mood, so all those things I just mentioned before. And if you're eating too low, then your metabolism is going to suffer. I had a guy who was like an amateur tennis player. Amateur tennis players are ripped. They're athletes. They do not mess around. This guy all of his tennis buddies started doing keto and they shamed him into doing keto with them. And he started fainting on court. I hadn't given him his results yet. And he and I were talking and he was saying like, oh, my buddies keto shamed me into keto. And what happened was, and I interrupted him before he even told me he was fainting on court because I had his results. I told him, I said, under no circumstances should be doing keto. Under no circumstances. He was way in the high carb range. And he just went silent when I said, under no circumstances should be keto genetically. And he went quiet. He said, I knew it. I absolutely knew it. The most high value test you could ever get in your entire life without even a close second is genetics testing because the data doesn't decay over time. We mentioned it, but I didn't say this part explicitly. It is the most high value test on the planet because you just need to run it once and the data is there. I don't exclude the other tests. They're wonderful. They're great. I recommend people get those, but the foundation is genetics. And it's the single most high value test you can get to optimize your health and well-being and longevity.
I highly agree. It's very confusing when you've had so many different diets, so many medications come and go, and so many things that do contribute to our own situation, whether it is genetics or not, or whether we want to say it's genetics and not take responsibility for it. Because there's that too. So it's beautiful to have concrete evidence that, as you say, this is the roadmap. This is what should guide us from here on out. And granted, our genetics can be on or off, but at the same time, this is the guide. This is your blueprint. It's like your fingerprint. It's never going to change. And so this is so beautiful to have this package. And this is why I'm very excited to share this, not just this episode, but also the fact of being able to provide these tests now, first and foremost, to my clients. So thank you so much for all your work, for all your knowledge and wisdom. This has been fantastic. Is there anything else that you'd love to leave our listeners with?
Sure. Not everyone's concern is weight, but a lot of people's are. And everyone knows people whose concern is weight. In this report, I found there are 3 major genetic categories of stubborn weight. Inflammatory water weight is number 1, which is the most common. It's not calorie weight. The most common sources of stubborn weight I see is the inflammatory water weight. We already mentioned some of it before. The influences of the inflammatory genes, the histamine genes, the salt water retention for the water weight, vitamin D receptor genes, several overexercising triggering an inflammatory response. So if people are concerned about weight and they've just not been able to deal with it, then I cannot recommend this report enough because it's going to look at those 3 main categories of stubborn weight gain and give practical things to do about it.
I highly agree. The personalized approach is the only approach that we should be looking at. It's not the fad diets. It's not the one size fits all serums, lotions, or potions for our hair, but there's so much more to garner from understanding ourselves and really empowering ourselves so much more. Thank you again for touching upon weight loss, because that is a big topic, of course, in society and in general around the world. But thank you again for your time, wisdom, and knowledge, and for sharing your expertise. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you, Joanna.
Where can our listeners find you?
If you want to learn more about me, I'm at drsamshea.com. Also, put my name into any podcast. You can put my name into YouTube. My YouTube channel has tons of interviews. I'm also a stand-up comic, believe it or not. And I use my comedy to advocate for those on the spectrum, like myself. And my comedy is edutainment. There's no cursing. There's no politics. There's no gratuitous body fluid jokes. It's clean observational comedy modeled after Gaffigan, Seinfeld, and some other clean observational comics. And comedy is more my advocacy work as opposed to my professional work, but I do comedy professionally and I weave it into my practice and how I teach. That's how people can find me. And yeah, I'm here to help. I'm really here to help get the genetics out there and help the public understand it and see the value of it, and then to help coaches and practitioners really leverage this and get this into the hands of the public.
Thank you again for all that you do. And thank you again to our listeners for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Alopecia Angel podcast, a positive light in healing alopecia. You can do this and we can help. Spread the word that reversing alopecia is possible by telling your friends and family.